and we're joined here virtually today with Jim Banko. Want to thank him for his time. Before I turn it over to Jim, just want to go over a couple of things with you because we do have some new folks in here today. So first, I want to let you know that we are recording this session and we'll try to post it online at a later date. Second thing, which I'm sure you've already noticed, is you don't have a video of yourself showing and you're muted. There's nothing you can do about that. You didn't do anything wrong, just the settings we have. And it also might look like to you that you're the only person here in attendance with Jim and I today. But I promise you, and as you've been hearing us talk about, there are other people in here. We're just in an anonymous participation mode, so only Jim and I know everybody that's in here with us today. So there, if you just joined us, there's a poll up on the screen if you want to participate. See if you've seen Jim speak before or not. If you don't, that's okay. Just click submit when you're done with your answer, and I'll close that poll in a couple seconds. We'll primarily be communicating with our Q&A feature, so you can find that either on the right side of your screen if it popped up for you when you joined today, or if you wiggle your mouse or touch your screen, you'll see your control panel pop up at the bottom. You can click on that button that has a square with a question mark. And if you don't see that button, you can click on the button that has 3 dots, and that'll bring up your Q&A panel for you. So if I'm not mistaken, Jim, we will be taking questions at the end. But feel free to type in your questions and comments as we go along here, just so you don't forget it. Click send. All panelists is the default, so that'll come right to Jim and I. So that's perfect, and we'll get to as many questions as comments at the end as we can. All right, so I want to thank the sponsors of our University Express program. It's my Department of Senior Services, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Western New York, Excelsior Orthopedics, and Wegmans, because they help make this program possible. Want to let you know that us at Senior Services are here for you. If you have any questions about services, programs, benefits, you name it, please give us a call. We're at 858-8526. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce Jim Banko to you. Jim Banko taught English for almost 30 years in the city of Buffalo. He taught every level from 8th grade to AP English. Jim also taught SAT prep classes at Buffalo State College. As the oldest of 8 children, college money was not available, so Jim spent 14 years going to night school to get his degrees. Jim was a journeyman iron worker who worked on many of the major buildings in Buffalo. He fondly remembers walking up the 33 flights of stairs at the now vacant HSBC building. But this foundation was the basis of his teaching career. He learned what men do to support their families and the struggles that we all go through in living a life. Jim sums up his philosophy simply with a quote from Tom Schulman: "We don't read and write literature because it is cute. We read and write literature, poetry, novels, essays because we are members of the human race, and the human race is filled with passion. Medicine, law, business, engineering are noble pursuits and necessary to sustain life, but beauty, love, romance, these are what we stay alive for." Jim saw these lessons every day on the job and tried to convey the importance of knowledge to his students. I'm going to close that poll now. And then, Jim, I'm going to turn it over to you. So I'm going to make your picture bigger, and feel free to get started.
Okay, here I am. My picture's bigger. Okay, let me press this OK thing. Okay, some people have caught me before. Okay. All right, if you've caught me before, then you know what you're going to get here. All right. Well, welcome everyone. It's good to see you on this rainy day. So let's just begin. Before we begin talking about the old man in the sea, you need a background of Ernest Hemingway. You need to know something about the man because that lays the foundation of how he writes and his importance in the whole scheme of American literature. Ernest Hemingway was born in 1899 in Oak Park, Illinois. He was the second of 6 children. His father was a doctor, and his father took him hunting and fishing and really was an outdoor type. And that's where Ernest Hemingway got his real foundation. And those of you who have read a great deal of Hemingway know that he writes a great deal about being outside, hunting, fishing, and being out in the wilderness. He played football and boxed in high school, and he had an eye injury from his sports activity that kept him from World War One. He edited the high school paper while he was in high school, and he graduated and got a job from in the Kansas City Star. And that really is the foundation for the way he writes, because he writes in a very succinct, straightforward, knowledgeable way, just as a newspaper reporter would. He doesn't use very many big words, straight declarative sentences. He doesn't go on out there and try to impose a wild vocabulary on you. He tells it like it is. And he insisted in World War One on going and joining the war effort. And because of that eye injury that I mentioned, he joined the American Red Cross and became an ambulance driver. And that becomes crucial to understanding. He was an ambulance driver. That means he went out into the field in World War One, which was a horrible, horrible war. And he was picking up body parts. It was horrible, and it had a terrible, terrible effect on him. He was severely wounded in Italy, and he recalled that life, after he was wounded, life slipped away from him like a pull of a silk handkerchief from a pocket by the corner. Again, Hemingway's got all kinds of quotes, but this feeling of death stayed with him for all of his life. The experience gave Hemingway an obsession with his own fear of death and a need to test his courage throughout his life. He became fascinated with soldiers, with bullfighters, people who challenged death and who challenged dangers, people who climbed mountains, who really went up there and challenged life. Because one of the things about Hemingway, he did not believe in an afterlife. He believed that everything was here and now. So in order to get the most out of life, you had to challenge it. You had to go on up there and grab it by the horns, if you will. You had to face life and dare it and challenge every way, because after you're gone, you're simply gone. There's nothing left. There is no heaven. There is no hell. There's nothing. He believed there was a thing he called nada, which is simply nothingness. He was an insomniac too because of this. He, in several of his stories, and some of them I've talked about, Clean, Well-Lighted Place, they deal about somebody who can't deal with the night. They always have to have a light on, because once the lights go out, that's a represented symbolically of your own death. And he couldn't handle it. The war experiences became the foundation of much of his writing. After the war, he became a foreign correspondent for the Toronto Star, and he interviewed many of the famous people. Mussolini he interviewed, and Hitler. He became and then he lived in Paris. He went and he lived in Paris, and Gertrude Stein and James Joyce and Ezra Pound and a lot of other famous writers, and they became known as the Lost Generation, because something happened with World War One. All of a sudden, this nice, pristine little world, the Ozzie and Harriet world that everybody was living in World War One, their young people started coming home in body bags, coffins, death counts, and it destroyed the image of what what life was really all about. And they believed that their lives and the hopes had been destroyed by the war. So they became this lost generation, and they really wrote some very sad kind of things, depressing kind of things. I mean, his first novel was The Sun Also Rises. Again, that is about this lost generation. Okay. He was married 5 times. And his father committed suicide in 1928, and that shaped a lot of the way he thought too, and his war experiences that shaped him. In 1950, he wrote Across the River and Into the Trees, and it was a failure. The critics just jumped all over him and just said, he's done, he's finished, he's no longer. Remember, this is the writer that wrote Sun Also Rises, Farewell to Arms, For Whom the Bell Tolls. I mean, major, major pieces of writing, and his short stories have always been more than worth reading. And he writes this Across the River, and the critics just jumped all over him. He really had a very hard time facing up to that criticism. Well, in 1952, he wrote The Old Man and the Sea. And it really just jumped off the shelf. The Old Man and the Sea was published in its entirety in Life magazine in 1952. Life magazine sold 5 million copies, which is unheard of, that it would sell that many copies. In 2 days, it sold that many. So you have to ask yourself why. Is there something to this? Well, let's find out. It also, in its first publishing, it printed 50,000 copies. But again, this is unheard of. And again, it made him some money, but it also brought him to fame that he was missing. He was back. Ernest Hemingway with The Old Man and the Sea was now back. He was in the game again. And in 1953, The Old Man and the Sea won the Nobel Prize, in 1952 rather, it won the Nobel Prize for Literature. And then in 1954, Ernest Hemingway, for his entire body of work, won the Nobel Prize for Literature. It doesn't get any better than that. There's no higher accomplishment. There's the Nobel Prize in Literature is the epitome of honor for a writer. And then even in his own humility, he said there was other people more deserving. But they said, no, you are. And the Nobel Prize that he won is on display in a Catholic church in Cuba. He was going to give the money to the Cuban people, but he said Batista would have just taken it because this was before Castro. So what he did, he gave, and it's funny that Hemingway himself converted to Catholicism. And in my research, I want to find out, I said, why is that? I mean, he didn't seem to be that much of a religious person. And he just thought Catholicism had all the components that he was looking for. There was symbolism, there was this thing called the Mass, there was saints, there was something to it. There had some meat to it. And eventually, in 1961, Ernest Hemingway, God bless him, was treated at the Mayo Clinic for depression, and he was a heavy drinker and womanizer and doing all kinds. And he fell into a lot of depression, and he was treated at the Mayo Clinic, and he had undergone multiple shock treatments. And then he went back down, and they started living. He was living in Ketchum, Idaho, with his fifth wife, Mary. And well, to make it very simple, he went down one morning and put a shotgun to his forehead and pulled the triggers. He ended his life that way, which is curious when you look at his family, because his father committed suicide, his brother committed suicide, and his sister committed suicide. And then he had a niece who you might remember, Margot Hemingway, who was a tall, beautiful supermodel. She herself committed suicide. So there's something, they said there was some kind of a chemical imbalance in the family, but that's never been proven. And Ernest Hemingway was buried in a Catholic ceremony, and he's in Ketchum, Idaho. So you have to really understand, something about Ernest Hemingway before we, get into. Now, the other thing about Ernest Hemingway and his style of writing, which is essential to understand, is his iceberg theory of writing. What the iceberg theory of writing means is omission. The vast majority of an iceberg is under the surface. You can't see it. It's hidden. And as he says in a quote, if a writer of prose knows enough about what he is writing, knows enough of what he is writing about, he may find things he knows. And the reader, if the writer is writing truly enough, will have a feeling of those things as strongly as though the writer had stated them. What that really means is that instead of telling you, I'm going to show you. You're going to have to dig into it yourself. On the surface, The Old Man and the Sea is about an old man going fishing. That's all. He's always going fishing. So what's the big deal? Well, there is a big deal, because underneath this seemingly simple premise, there's a story. There's a philosophical treatise going on over here. And let's see if we can find out what makes this a big deal. When he starts out, The Old Man and the Sea, he doesn't even give the old man a name. He's a failure. As he says, the very first sentence is, he is not caught on, he was an old man who fished in a skiff, and he had not caught a fish for 84 days. That's almost 3 months. He hasn't caught a fish. And fish is what he uses to sell the fish in the harbor when he brings the catch in. He doesn't eat them all himself. He sells them, and that's how he makes his living. He had not caught his fish in 84 days. And as you read this, you can pick up the metaphor. This is Ernest Hemingway and the criticism that he hadn't published anything that was worth anything in more than 84 days. So now he was over here, he's without a fish, without any sustenance for 84 days. And all the people in the village, they thought that he was just a failure. We don't need him. Look at him. He's just an old, crummy just an old man. There's only one person, there's only three characters in this whole story. The old man, Santiago, a boy, Manolin, and a huge marlin. They fish. Huh? And the Manolin becomes, that's the circle of life. That's really the fisherman when he was young. That's the fisherman when he was the boy too, starting out becoming a fishermen. I mean, that's how these people make their life and then living, and that's how this young boy is going to go on up there and make his living. And he gives the old man support. And it's one thing as we see as we go through that the old man he always maintains his dignity. We're going to talk when we get through this about Hemingway's code hero, about the definition of that code hero and how he behaves in the act, because the old man never acts any differently. He acts with strength, and he acts with courage, he acts with dignity all the time, which are components of this code hero. The boy comes in offering him food, and he said, no, I don't need any. I just had rice and fish and beans. And the boy knows that he hasn't. I mean, he hasn't had any money. He hasn't caught any fish. He has had nothing to sell. And the thing, his apartment, this little shack where he lives is neat and clean, and everything is straightened up again. As bad as things are for him, he has to live with a certain sense of dignity, a certain sense of order, a certain sense of everything has its place. So he talks to the old man, and he says the boy, he loved the boy, as Hemingway said, and the boy loved him. And that makes a big thing, because that's the only connection he has with the people. The people in the town think that he was just some kind of a stiff. He's a failure. The boy's parents don't even want him near this guy because he's a failure. He's no good. He's just a failure, right? And that can't work. That can't work, right? So he goes on up there, and they're having this conversation. So now he's going to go on up there, and he's going to go on out. The next morning, he's got to go on out, and he's got to catch his fish. He goes out farther and farther than he has ever been. Remember now, this is an old man. He has nothing to eat in that boat. The only thing he's got an old piece of tuna fish that the employee had brought him, and a bottle of water. And this man, he never gives you his age, but he's elderly. He goes out with the other fishermen to catch a fish, and he goes out farther and farther and farther than he has ever been. And that's really another point of the story. He pushes himself to the limit. He does something that he's never. The only thing he can say, he says, I'm good at this. The boy asks him, he says, are you sure you can catch a fish this big? He says, I have to catch a big fish. He says, are you sure you can catch a fish that big? You are old. And then he went up there and he says, there are many tricks. So now he knows his confidence. He's been a fisherman for a long time. And there are ways. And now you can imagine he's in a 12-foot little skiff in the ocean. This isn't a lake, this is out in the ocean. And as he carries the boat and the sail, that he has to mount the sail into his boat. The sail is just a patchwork piece of cloth with rags and everything. So, I mean, it's really a dismal sight. But he takes this boat and he goes out and out and out and out into the farthest reaches of the ocean, out of sight of land and then the lights of Havana. And for 2 days, for 2 whole days, and the only fish, sometimes a flying fish, will flop into the boat, and he will take it, and he will gut it, and he will eat the raw fish, because that's all he has. And again, his courage, the endurance of the man, and that's what Hemingway is over there talking about, enduring. So now, at the beginning of the third day, he feels a tug on the line. Oh, what is that? What is that? There's something. What is that? This just isn't a fish. This thing there's a heaviness, there's a weight. So for 2 days, and he can't let it go. Remember now, they don't have poles. He's just hanging onto a line. He straps the line across his shoulders. And you have to emphasize this over and over again. This is an old man. And he's got the rope across his shoulders, okay? And it's cutting into him. Then the line cuts into his hand, so his hand is bleeding, and he can't even cut. I mean, he's in danger. He begins to get dizzy, and he's having chest pain, and he's facing death, if you will. But he's not going to give up. I have to catch this fish is mine, and he relates to the fish. The fish is my brother. It's a shame I have to kill you. It's a shame that somebody's going to have to eat you. It's a shame that somebody, but this is the way that life is. And as long as we're in this battle, let's do it together. But the marlin a huge fish, keeps pulling him and pulling him and pulling him out to sea. He does this for another 2 days, for 2 whole days and nights that he's out there in this boat. Finally, the marlin breaches. He jumps up out of the water, and it's 3 feet longer than the boat. This thing is 18 feet long, weighs over 1,500 pounds. It's enormous. It's huge. Oh my God! You know, now I've got to catch him. I've caught him. Now I've got to. How's he going to bring him in? How's he going to reel this in? So he starts pulling a little bit. He's waiting for the fish to tire out and tire out. So he goes in and he pulls the fish. He pulls it. Remember now, this elderly thing, it really working. He's feeling faint. He hasn't had anything to eat, and his hands are raw. He's got one hand that is so cramped he can't even open it. And he's pulling. Eventually, after another day, the fish, it's a test of wills. The fish gets tired, and he pulls him in close to the boat. And Santiago harpoons the fish and kills the fish. He's done his job. He's done his battle. Huh? So now he has to lash him off to the side because he can't put him in the boat. He's bigger than the boat. This thing is 3 feet longer than the boat. And it's got a sword, and a marlin. It's got this big pointy, they call it a sword. And he can't, so he lashes him off over to the side of the boat. Lo and behold, the blood from the fish starts to attract sharks. And the sharks smell this and they see this. And what do? As their animals, they come up and they start attacking the marlin. They start taking chunks of the marlin. They take huge bites of the marlin. They're taking, and Mandolin is, or not Mandolin, but the old man is, what are you doing? That's my fish. That's my fish. He's worked for 3 days. He hasn't had anything to eat. He's done, and now he makes, his harpoon breaks, so he makes another one with a knife and the butt end of the oar, and he tries stabbing and trying to keep it fails. It fails miserably. The sharks eat all of the marlin except the head and the tail. So alongside his boat, the only thing he's got lashed to it, right, are the head and the tail and the bones. The skeleton portion of the marlin, that's all that's left. And he says, oh my God, nobody will believe me. This was the catch of a lifetime. And look what happened. And there's something to be said about, his endurance, because he doesn't quit, and he has ultimate respect for he calls his fish his brother, because we're both in this battle of wills, and he won this time, but then the sharks come in, and the sharks, metaphorically, there's no question in my mind, the sharks are nothing but those critics who are doing a job on Hemingway because of his failure in his last bit of writing. So what does he do? He sails the boat back into harbor, and as he pulls in, all these other salesmen who haven't seen him in a couple of days, thought he had drowned and thought he had vanished out in the ocean. They see him with his boat, with his skeletal framework of his fish lashed to the side, and they're, oh my God, look at this thing. This thing's almost 18 feet long. And he caught this by himself. They realize, they understand that this fish was whole. This fish had everything. It was the sharks that did this, that Santiago had caught this fish. So what has he done? He's gained the respect of these fishermen again. He's renewed his spirit. He's renewed his health. So in effect, he's lost the battle, but he's won the war. And one of the things that Hemingway we talk about his self-esteem. Hemingway said, "Courage is simply grace under pressure." You think about that, what that means, what that says. Courage is grace under pressure. You talk about a bullfighter, and that's what he is, standing in a ring with his only thing he's got is a cape. And there's this 2,000-pound bull with his horns, and he's mad, and he's snorting and everything. And this bullfighter, to be successful, can't run. He can't go hide. He has to face up to that bull. And the closer he comes to him, I mean, that's the whole point of with the cape and everything. And they give them cheers because of how close the bull has come to the door. And because the closer he comes, the bigger the cheers. But in order to do that, the toreador has to stand there still, right? He has to be courageous, grace under pressure. If you remember, if you've read For Whom the Bell Tolls, Robert Jordan, when he stands there with the machine gun, he's going to blow up the bridge, and they're coming after him, and he's wounded and he can't move, and he's going to stay there in it because you have to. He says, "I can't run. I have to do what I have to do." Again, that thing, grace under pressure. And what Hemingway also says, he says, man is not made for defeat. Man can be destroyed, but not defeated. I mean, these sharks went over there and destroyed this marlin, this huge catch of fish that would have made Santiago a great deal of money once they cut it up and butcher it and sell the meat and everything. But it was destroyed. The sharks ate it. But was Santiago defeated? No, he was not defeated. He stood his ground and he maintained his dignity. And that's the thing that in this Code Hero that I wanted to, that it talks about. There are certain elements. If death is the end of everything, the man must do all for enjoyment and pleasure in his life now, and even challenge life now. Because if he believes that there's nothing afterwards, then now is the only moment. It becomes the duty of the hero to avoid death at all costs. He's not stupid. He's not going to go on up there and intentionally hurt himself. Life must continue. Life is everything. Death is nothing. A man must have a fear of death, but not be afraid to die. That's this thing about this grace under pressure. I can't imagine a better definition of courage. Grace under pressure. I can't imagine, because what's his name? Oh, what's his name? Ernest Hemingway covered the D-Day landing. Can you imagine how those kids, and they were kids, felt in those landing crafts? And even Hemingway himself, he said that is grace under pressure, because as soon as that door falls down, boom, 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 they're that's it. They're faced with death. They don't know how this thing is going to go on out. Man can never be a coward. In the face of death, he can never show fear. It's one thing, Santiago, he never hollers back at these men who are making fun of him. He never mocks them out. He never challenges them, and he has many examples. He talks when he's talking to Manolin, he talks about Joe DiMaggio. What Joe DiMaggio? What's he got to do with anything? He was a center fielder for the New York Yankees. What has that got to do with anything? He admired Joe DiMaggio because Joe DiMaggio played with such grace and dignity and elegance. Have you ever seen DiMaggio in the old films, Run and Catch It? He was one of the greats. He was elegant. He gracefully ran underneath the ball when he had to catch it. But he did this. He had bone spurs in his legs, which are extremely painful. It hurt, but yet he performed with dignity. He performed with grace. And that is the whole point of this being a code, of being this code hero, that you have honor, that you have dignity, that you have grace, that you never face defeat like a coward. That you rise to the occasion constantly. You never complain. The Greek word would probably be stoic, and that's really what Hemingway's code hero is. And his code hero is in all of his stories. The sun also rises, farewell to arms, right? That's for whom the bell tolls. They all act the same way, with this quiet fortitude, this inner peace, this inner strength that I have to do what I have to do, right? They're never acting cowardly. Like I said, the man can be defeated, right? But he's never going to be destroyed. No, not today. We're not gonna do that. So after Mandolin, or after Santiago brings his boat in he's not going to get any money. There's nothing left. There's nothing to sell. He simply just takes the admiration, because the other salesmen, or the other fishermen, are just in awe of what he had done. And again, those are the critics whoa, look at it. He ain't washed up. He's not done. He's not this lousy fisherman. He's not this, his life just isn't over. Look what he's done, even though the sharks have eaten this thing and destroyed it. But what's left is visible. The head, the bones, the backbone, everything, and this tail. He simply goes back to his cabin, shack, whatever you want to call it, and he lays down in the shack, and he does it in a very symbolic way. He lays there on his stomach with his arms stretched out, like he was being crucified. Right? There's a Christian motif there. Yes, he was. He was done, symbolic of the Jesus being crucified. They nailed him to the cross and everything. Well, he came back. He rose from whatever creative death that they were over here talking about, and he said he rose to the occasion, and that's the whole point of the story in this iceberg lettuce, what am I, crazy? iceberg theory iceberg theory of writing. It isn't just about a man going fishing. It's the story. He's all alone in the boat. What was the kids would say to me? What's he talking? He's alone in the boat, and he talks to himself. That's the only person he's got to talk to. He talks to himself, and he talks to himself about Joe DiMaggio. He talks to himself about the young lions, because he was in Africa once, and he saw young lions on the beach, fighting and playing with each other. And that reminds him of his youth, about remember? He thinks about, he was in an arm wrestling match with a man from another island. This went on for 24 hours. This arm wrestling match, they both put their arms down on the table and they lock wrists and everything, and they're trying to pin somebody. This went on for 24 hours. Finally, the old man rises to the occasion and he wins. That's what he thinks about while he's battling this overfish, about my endurance, about, can I survive this? Can I go on up there and do this? And even when he's having chest pains and he's seeing dots in front of his eyes, and he thinks to himself that, is this going to be over? But he doesn't quit. A man doesn't quit. A man doesn't throw in the towel. You never say no. He's going to stay with us. It's between me and you. He talks to the fish. It's between me and you, brother. It's between me and you. One of us is going to win, and one of us is going to lose. And again, the same way as he talks to the critics, he pushes himself farther out into the ocean than he's ever been. I don't know about you, but I've been out in small boats in the ocean, deep sea fishing, and I don't like it. I don't like being out of sight of land. You know, if you've ever been out in the ocean and they have swells and everything, and you look around and the ocean is above your head, and next thing you know, it's above your head, I think it's scary. Of course, I'm not a fisherman. I don't, that's not my cup of tea. But there he is out there in the middle of this barren sea wilderness. And but that doesn't bother him. He's got a job, he's on a mission. I have to do what I have to do, and I am going to catch this fish. He didn't think he was going to catch this 1,500-pound marlin, but he accepts the challenge and the fate. And I think the whole point of the story is man facing this, this, this very difficult journey, chore, if you will, job, with dignity and grace under pressure. He doesn't give up. And there's the lesson for us to learn, is that we live our lives with grace under pressure. We live our lives with dignity. Even is the shack. Manila is very impressed. He goes back to the shack. Everything is in order. There's a place for every cup. There's a place for his teaspoons. He doesn't complain. That's the other thing. Santiago hasn't had anything to eat in 2 days, but he doesn't complain. He never says to the mandolin, "I'm hungry, I'm starving." And he's hungry, he's starving, he hasn't had anything to eat. We're only human, right? That's the way it should be. So those are the lessons. And I think that's the important thing of literature, that in every piece of literature that I read that's worth anything, we come away with a lesson to learn about life. As I told Katie before that, as I told Katie before that, before when we were talking, when I was a teacher, I used to write on the board, "If you let me, I will change your life." And of course, they'd look at me like, "Really? Really? You'll change my life?" Yes, really. But it's a bargain. You have to do what I tell you. You have to listen. I'm not going to overburden you, and nobody's going to have a 40-page paper on the relative values of Santiago and the code hero. No, just listen to what I've got to say and try to respond and try to feel about that. I mean, that's what, in my opening, that's why we read literature, as opposed to, do we all want to be a plumber? We need plumbers, but I'd like to have a plumber that knows a little bit about Shakespeare, because then it'd understand how mad I am because my toilet doesn't work. I really believe that literature gives you a foundation, in essence, to make us to live by. And you get a guy like Santiago, if that's not an example of courage, fortitude, endurance, I just, I'm always fascinated by people who climb mountains. Why did they do that? Why would you put your life in danger? Why would you put yourself over here in danger? And they interviewed a guy who's climbed Mount Everest. He said, "Because it's there." Oh, okay. I guess that's a good enough answer. I climbed 29,000 feet up into the air, challenging life, challenging death, because it's there. Why does somebody have to run 26 miles, 385 yards for a marathon? See if I could do it. I've been in gyms where the guy is in the back grunting and groaning. We've all been back there with picking up the heavy stuff. I've got two 10-pound weights in my arms. And there's a guy in the back with a 260-pound, So why are you doing, what, somebody ever going to ask you to pick up 260 pounds? He says, "I want to see if I can do it." There's the point. Let's see if I can do it. Challenge myself. And that's what Santiago did. He went out farther than he ever was. He pushed himself to the limit. And even when he caught the fish, he made himself, he tested himself, his will against the fish. And he hated to do it. He didn't want to kill the fish. He says, "But I have to, my brother. I have to." And then he brought the fish back in destroyed? No, man can be defeated, but not destroyed. I caught this fish, and the man, he was redeemed. So that's the lesson that you try to walk away with from every piece of literature that that I've read when I'm trying to teach young people, old people. That's the thing. Give me this poor guy that the police officers shoved down in front of City Hall. They kept on complaining that this elderly man that they. I said, I'm 2 years older than he is. You know, I'm I'm not elderly, am I? You know, it doesn't. You gotta go on up. And even this old man, he was there trying to do something. This old elderly man at City Hall, he was trying to do something. Right? He just wanted to say something, or he was there protesting. He was even at his advanced age, you know, he didn't want to just sit home in his chair and just waste away. And that's the thing. Santiago had a challenge. He says, I've got to go on up and catch this fish, and I've got to go on up and make it. And that was Ernest Hemingway's challenge. And I really, he's one of them. I was doing a class once a couple of years ago, and a guy actually said he met Ernest Hemingway. And I said, no, you didn't. How? What are the circumstances? Well, the guy was in Pamplona, Spain. He was in the Navy, and I guess he was on leave. And in Pamplona, they have this race with the bulls. They let bulls go out into the street, and people run and try to avoid getting gored and chased by the bull. Sounds like fun, huh? Huh? So he was in a bar, and in comes walking Hemingway, who had been drinking, and I says, "Oh my, yeah, oh my, oh, you know." He said, "Did you talk to him? Did you shake his hand? Did you do anything?" He says, "No." He says he was pretty gruff, but just there's Ernest Hemingway, because I think that Ernest Hemingway is the foremost American writer that's that's in words. And his short stories, if you've never read his short stories, please do so. His short stories are better than his novels, I think, because he really gets to the point. But again, there's this constant thing through it, this code hero. He talks about light and death and challenges. And if you stop and think about it, those are all things that we too think about in our quieter moments, if you will. None of us are immune to what's going on and what's going on in our life. Katie, do you have any questions?
Yes, Jim. But first, I want to thank you for transporting us back to the classroom as always. Oh my gosh, that was awesome. So the first question that came through is depression a common factor among writers, especially Hemingway's time?
Well, I'm not a clinical psychologist, so I don't know. I think most writers that I've studied see things differently than we do. We look at a tree and see a tree. They see something else. They see a foundation. They see life. They see death. They see a change of season. And I do think that most of the writers uh, have a different approach to life, whether that's the depression or not. But there's something in their mindset that's different than the rest of us.
Okay, thank you. So next we have a comment is, had read this in 1966 and I don't remember of it being presented like you. Thank you, Jim.
Oh, thank you. I was worried about this because I told Katie I've never done anything like this. I've never done this TV thing in front of a bunch of students. Yeah, I can handle that at ease, and I enjoyed that so much when I was at all these places. So thank you for your support and your comments.
Thank you. Question. There is a story which I read that Hemingway at the Normandy invasion took over a squad of soldiers whose squad leader had been killed and led them on an attack of a period or time. Apologize, I don't know how to pronounce that. Seems consistent with his approach to life, but is it true?
No, no, really. One thing that Hemingway liked to do, especially, he loved to embellish his own feats. And he was on the ship, you know, he was on the ship where the soldiers departed from and they're landing in Normandy. There's no way that they were gonna allow Hemingway to take over a group of troops. He even had a story that he liberated Paris. Uh, that he got there ahead of everybody, was in a room in the Ritz Hotel when the troops came in. That's another bogus story. So Hemingway was his own best press agent.
Okay. Another comment. As always, Jim, an excellent presentation. Can't wait for the next one. We have a question. It's been a long time since I read this story. Isn't there an albatross in the story?
No, no, really, there's some flying fish. There's some other fish that circle around when a fish is, that's how the fishermen know when there's a fish gonna breach or something, because these birds in the air, which an albatross is, they go down and go after the leftovers, right? And but there's no mention I've read this several times. I've no mention of an albatross. There is a story about an albatross in another poem.
Okay, well, thank you.
Okay.
There's one question I asked for clarification because I wasn't sure what the person meant, so I'm sorry, but maybe we can get to that. And two questions, they're the same. Have you done any writing of your own?
I've tried. Yes, I have. Like I said, I've got a brother who now he's written his second novel. My brother Steve. Maybe some of you guys have read a lot of his stuff. This woman's talking about the Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. That's the story with the albatross. And my brother Steve he's just having his second novel published, and we talk a lot about writing. I think I'm a much better essayist than I am a writer of fiction. I have a lot of letters published in the news because I have some strong feelings about things, and I've never had a letter turned down. And that is a good thing. But starting over here writing fiction it's time consuming. I mean, it took Hemingway. I mean, it took him over a year to write this, because you edit, you take out, you do it again, you rewrite. And I admire people that can do that.
Definitely, certainly a skill. So we have a couple more comments that came through, Jim. Some praise. Fabulous, loving this. I am inspired. Good job. There's their fifth presentation of yours, and it was your usual great talk.
Oh, geez, thank you much. Thank you for people who are repeat customers. Yeah, this is what you get.
Mm-hmm. Question that came through, when were you in Key West?
When was I in Key West?
Yes.
Oh, maybe 5 years ago. And have you ever taken a tour of his house with the cats? And, because they've got a whole setup down there, and going to Sloppy Joe's bar and.
No, Hemingway. Okay.
No, when was
All right.
And when was Hemingway in Key West? I don't know the exact dates because he was filled with wanderlust. He married 5 times, and that doesn't count the number of affairs that he had and everything. And he had a home in Ketchum, Idaho. He lived in Paris. You know, he just bounced all over the place. And he finally, he loved the Cuban people. For some reason, that really he just admired. And matter of fact, the story of the old man in the sea comes from a man that he knew as a fisherman who went through the same experience. And that's where the story came from. But the exact dates that he was living in Key West, I really don't know. I just know if you're there, you can go into his house. His house is a museum, and it's filled with because he has something. It's filled with cats. And he loved and Sloppy Joe's bar, where he loved to get sloppy.
Okay, well, thank you, Jim. I think that's all I'm seeing coming through the Q&A. I'll just wait a couple more seconds if anyone has anything. We have a thanks. So as always, Jim, it's a pleasure working with you. I appreciate your time and your passion in going on this adventure with me virtually. And to everyone here joining, thank you for your time. We appreciate you being here and participating. And as always, I'm looking for feedback, so please send me your ideas and anything you've got. But